Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for tuning back in to What's a Woolpert. Today, we're going to talk about bicycle and pedestrian safety with John Brigham. And of course, as always, we have Ben Blumenscheid here helping with the questioning and the production. So, like I said, we're going to focus on a different topic today, and we're very fortunate to have John here with us. John, would you like to give a little bit of background, your
Yeah,
services, where you're
sure.
at,
Thanks.
and that kind of stuff?
Okay, so I'm a traffic engineer with Woolpert. I've got about 34 years experience in traffic engineering. It covers everything from traffic signal design, lighting, ITS, traffic studies, including bicycle and pedestrian studies and more. And so I am involved in bicycle and pedestrian planning and also design for projects. And so, really, what got me into all of this is just my, um, desire to help others, especially in the area of safety for like all modes of transportation, but for bicycles and pedestrians. And I first started, with safety for pedestrians when I was in elementary school. I thought about it, I was like, yeah, that was a long time ago. But anyway, a long time ago, they had like safety patrols and that sort of thing. And so that's when I started, for pedestrians crossing intersections. I lived in a community where kids really, they didn't have a lot of parents walking them to school. They were busy at work. And so, they depended on, together, walking together in groups and other people. And then at major locations, they did have adult guards, but most of the time they didn't have that. So, I thought that would be something good to do to help others. And then eventually kind of ended up in, it's funny how I ended up in that same kind of area, just pedestrian safety and that sort of thing, and for cyclists as well. I moved to Texas in January, and so I've only been down here a short time, and I wanted to find, a way to help others, particularly in the area of safety for pedestrians and cyclists. And so a position came open on the committee that TxDOT has, which is the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. And I thought that would be a great way, to help others. So I applied, and then they accepted my application. And so that's just the start of where we are right now on
Okay. So it goes all the way back to the safety town, which I think most of us, big wheels and the little, parking lot. That's kind
yeah,
of funny.
that's
I
so
don't think
cool.
anybody's gone back that far in
Yeah,
their,
I thought about it, and I was like, when did I start? That's a long time ago. So
yeah.
I remember doing safety patrol when I was a kid. I think it was
yeah,
like fourth or fifth grade or something. You would take turns, going out with the little flags.
that's right.
So I was going to say, like, we look around a little bit and, try to get some backstory on what services you're offering and your involvement on this topic. And it seems like, I looked at Texas, obviously, because as you've shared, you're part of the Texas DOT's committee to discuss these things. But I looked at a couple other states, and it seems like even though this concept of safety patrol goes back to all of us, like in third grade, it seems like it looked like Texas started this around 2015. It looked like it had a formal push. I think Ohio, where Ben and I are at, is around 2021. It looked like for a formal push. Like, since it's been around so long, but like what's the driver? Is it truly safety? Is it having a tourist economy for bicycles? Is it health? Is it carbon footprint? Like, what is the driver for most of these committees?
So that's a great question. So our committee, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, has 11 members, and they're from various parts of the state and various kind of walks of life. So when I applied, I thought it would be, well, everybody's probably going to be an engineer or they're going to be a bicycle planner. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's not the case. There's some of that, but it's just, there's different things. Like there's one person that has some visual impairments. And so he's providing his view of, what happens when pedestrians that are, visually impaired or has some other challenges, what happens when they come to intersections or when they're following their path to work or to school. And it's really kind of an eye-opening thing to have others to kind of give you more valuable insight like that. And then there's people on the committee that, they had no choice but to walk to work. And
Mm-hmm.
so they, talk about their challenges with that. And then there's other planners and engineers and so forth. So it's a good mix from around the state. So you get to hear a lot about what people's needs are and then how we can help. And the main thing is we're there to see how we can advise on policies and how we can help Texans across the state. Like you mentioned, and so in 2015, this big push for active transportation planning has come up in Texas, and we have aggressively taken on the task because since that time, crashes for pedestrians and cyclists are up
Mm-hmm.
substantially. So there's been kind of an all-out, effort to bring that down. So safety is like a major concern. That's not the only concern, like you mentioned. So there's been meetings around the state right now about active transportation planning, and so there's a consultant for TxDOT that's going around, and they're meeting with communities and agencies across the state, and that's happening right now. And when they go, our summary so far has been, the report last week was, we asked people, why are they there and what their needs are. And so the three things that have come up the most for the people that have attended the meetings have been safety, connectivity, and accessibility. And so those things seem to be, they're coming, to the top as the most important things that people, are hoping to get out of the programs, out of the plans.
Yeah, and it was funny looking at some of those reports. I mean, I was shocked at the amount of detail that they had regarding time of day, like COVID impact, like race, gender, like all kinds of stuff that they had amassed and put into these reports to try to make sense of the pedestrian and the, I guess, bicycle safety. And like I said, Ohio, I looked at some of their stuff, and obviously Texas's was very robust because it sounds like Texas has been at this for a while. But do most states have big programs like this, or is it a federal, or does federal oversight for something like this, or?
Well, I think every state has a program, and some people's programs are larger than others. And so, what I've found over the past, I don't know, 30 years or so, previously there was more of a focus on cars
Mm-hmm.
and trucks than just getting people there efficiently, and there was less of that for cyclists and pedestrians. And for schools, yes, there was some,
Mm-hmm.
but for just general pedestrians, how they got places, there was less of that, as far as importance was concerned. But I think over, like you said, it's been like over the past maybe 8 to 10 years or so, there's been more of a push and more of demand from the public. They expect more out of the departments of transportation across the country, not just in Texas or Ohio, but they're expecting more, and they're asking, these departments to do more. They want safety. They want to be safe. They want to have connections. So, we're trying to eliminate areas where there's missing sidewalk, or, if they need
Mm-hmm.
sidewalk, we want them to be able to do that, because people, they're trying to get to work. It's not just, some people drive cars, but in some states, a lot of people that don't have cars, or they're, close by, they want to be able to walk to work. They want to be able to walk to venues to have, a good time. They want to shop, be able to walk to shop. And same thing for cycling. They want paths. They want areas where they feel safe and that they can use. And so these are really important issues. One thing that at my last meeting was last Friday with TxDOT, the Texas Transportation Commission, they recognize this, and they awarded $345 million in construction, and also planning dollars for people that have active transportation plans, and they want somebody to perform those for them. They have that, and for construction of sidewalks and shared use paths and bike paths and that sort of thing. And so that money was awarded to about 43 communities across the state. And so that's going to help them deliver their programs and make all those things happen, the safety and the connectivity and accessibility. And so that's what they're looking at doing. That's part of the program.
Hmm.
So
And I guess for that amount of money, it's a lot. And I saw a statistic that said this is just for bicycles. It said that the CDC was saying that bicycle injuries account for something like $23 billion each year in terms of insurance, lost productivity, healthcare, quality of life
right.
stuff. So it's a big number. And not to be morbid, but like you kind of said, one of the other things it said that was that I think they said since 1975 the amount of deaths among cyclists was four times quadrupled since today. And then even on the pedestrian side, it said that, and again, I don't be morbid, but I'm just, there's a lot of people out there, I guess, and why we maybe haven't put as much attention on this historically, now that we have some of that data, is that they said a pedestrian just killed roughly every 71 minutes in 2021 in a car accident, which is pretty significant numbers. It's maybe surprising we haven't heard about some of these things. It seems like it's come into more vogue in the last couple of years, but it's definitely not a little or inexpensive issue. It's I'm assuming that's why they're putting big dollars behind it.
Yeah, that's true. And so, as long as you mentioned safety and crashes and so forth. And so in Texas, they do have tools in their toolkit. And one of those is intersection scoring tool. And
Hmm.
so when new projects happen in the state of Texas, designers are asked to use this intersection scoring tool, and it helps them to determine at an intersection at least what things they can do to improve safety. And it basically is a predictor of like outcomes. So if you use a roundabout, then
Hmm.
you cut down accidents by 70 or 80% versus another type intersection in some cases. So it gives them insight on options for design to help with safety of motorists and pedestrians and cyclists. So that's one of the tools that they have available in this state. A second tool is the pedestrian screening applications tool. So that tool is available for use. Anybody can go on the TxDOT website. And so if you live in a particular city and you want to check in on how things are going, you can type the information in, and it gives you statistics on how many crashes there have been. There's a heat map on there, so you
Hmm.
can see where the concentration of pedestrian crashes are, and that sort of thing. And you can use these tools to assist in providing like countermeasures. So what do we do when these things are the case? Do we need pedestrian signals? Do we need lighting? So in Texas, one thing that they noticed immediately is a large percentage of cyclists and crashes for pedestrians have occurred during low light conditions.
Hmm.
So maybe just nighttime or just before dusk or something like that. They're having crash issues, and so they're looking at where they can put in lighting to help with that thing. So those sorts of things, so pedestrians and cyclists, they can be seen
Hmm.
by others and reduce the likelihood of those types of crashes. But there's a lot more happening around the state right now. It's really an exciting time, for cyclists and pedestrians right now here.
Yeah.
So,
What drives up some of those? Is it just the amount of traffic on the roads, or are there other?
so there's a lot of factors. So sometimes, and I'll give you an example of pedestrians. Lots of times when pedestrians don't have sidewalk or they're missing a link, people tend to walk in the street. So like in Ohio, for instance, if it snowed and you had a lot of snow in the grass and there's no sidewalk, a lot of times people will walk in the street because you don't want to get your feet wet, soaked, so that sort of thing. Or when it's raining, same thing, you don't want to get your feet muddy. So people are walking in the street, and sometimes they're hit, and sometimes even killed when that happens. Not just in inclement weather, but just regular conditions. I participated in the Safe Routes to School program when I was in Ohio, and so we worked with schools across the state. And it's really interesting when you go out with the students and you ask them to show me the path that you take to get home. And so sometimes it's a lot different than what you think, and sometimes it's a pretty dangerous path. Kids that are young, they don't have crossing guards like we were talking about earlier. They don't have a lot of that now with the safety patrols and the AAA programs with the crossing guards. And so one of my trips, I got to an intersection and the kids were pretty young. And so the intersection was signalized, but it didn't have pedestrian signals and there's nobody there. And I said, well, do you guys have a crossing guard or somebody that helps you cross? And they said, no. And I said, well, how do you get across? And they were like, well, we cross when we think it's safe. But, so that's the kind of thing that you see. Same thing we were talking about, missing sidewalks. And then so part of the time people are out in the street and that sort of thing. That's what they're looking at. So.
And I saw, I think, similar to like you said, the safe passages to school. Texas had this Road to Zero initiative
Hmm.
where they're, as the best I understand it, trying to basically say they're going to have no roadway deaths by, I think they said 2050.
Right, 2050. That's right. And so right now, and I'm glad you mentioned that, TxDOT has a consultant, and they're traveling around the state, and they'll be in Houston on November 7th, but they're traveling around the state to talk to people, citizens, agencies, whoever they can about issues and concerns that they have, and they're compiling this data as they go around the state and working on a report. And at the end, they will, have a report that summarizes what people need and problems that have happened across the state, and then countermeasures that we can apply to reduce these crashes and to save people's lives, and also to make it a better quality of life for people, because it's not only the safety. They get lots of information back, and some of it is I just want for leisurely travel to be able to take a trail and on a weekend or something and have a good time with friends. So,
So I get,
but yeah, just for safety, there's a big push here, and they're doing everything that we can. There's other safety studies that are unrelated to this happening around the state right now. So,
hmm. I was going to say, looking at that a little bit closer, that's a pretty aggressive. I mean, I'm not. People drive kind of nuts sometimes, and Texas is a big state. You've got education and awareness. You've got maybe equipment like what people have on their bikes or on their wearing, on their bodies as they're walking around. You also have the
yeah,
physical infrastructure, bike
right.
lanes and I don't know, elevated pathways. And I saw some things even where they specifically, because my background's geospatial stuff, they picked out trying to use GIS to collect data to monitor pedestrian movement and cycling movement. I mean, is one of these things really tip the scale, or is it truly just a combination of education, equipment, infrastructure? Uh,
It's all encompassing. So everything that you mentioned, we have to do a little bit of everything to be able to get people to be safe and have it conditions available so that they are safe. And then with a lot of the new software that's available, that's going to be used a lot. That kind of predicts, like I was saying earlier, the crashes and things that we can do, as engineers and planners, to make the likelihood of somebody having a particular accident, make that lower. And so we're trying to get it lower and lower until it gets to zero. And we're putting, and Texas is putting a lot of money towards these programs to try to make that happen. And I think, I believe once we get started, I'm looking at the next 3 to 5 years. So we're working on all these things now. We should be seeing some reductions
mhm.
in crashes with cyclists and pedestrians and so forth, based on some of the programs that have been implemented right now. And so some things are in planning stages, and then people just got awarded money for construction, so they have design underway, and they'll have their projects constructed, and we'll start to see some changes and hopefully a lot of reductions in crashes in the next 2 to 3 years. I'm hoping so.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. The earlier you can put that into the engineer's planning phase, I'm going to guess that's way easier than retrofitting stuff after the fact.
Yes.
Just get the planners and engineers thinking that when you put this in, it's going to have an extra lane or it's going to have additional lights or something. So then you don't, from the ground up, you've got a better handle on it.
Yeah, and something that I noticed, and it's here and in other states. Um, in the past, there's things that they don't particularly focus on, and there are things that we need, like lighting. And so in major cities, you see it a lot. But when you get to like suburban areas and kind of rural areas, there's not so much of that. And we'll be looking at that as a group, and engineers and planners across the state, to see if those types of things and other things can help. And one thing, like you mentioned earlier, Daniel, it's education too. There's a piece to that for all. And so working with the schools and getting students started right out of the gates to understand safety at intersections, like what do you do when crossing the street, those types of things, and trying to help them when they get out, just so to be kind of something that they can always remember, to be safe when they're walking or cycling.
Mhm.
I think there's a few things here, Dan, that would this would make a pretty good lightning round. We've thrown around a couple terms like roundabout, bike lane, protected bike lane, a bike trail. One of the things in Ohio that I hear a little bit about is the rails to trails thing, which there's already some existing infrastructure there, and they've just converted it. Do you want to go through some of these terms and just kind of
Okay, so the first thing is we're talking about roundabouts and safety at roundabouts, and so for that, it does definitely um, reduce crashes and pedestrians. Everything is slower speed. So, for instance, if you're at a four-way intersection and you get hit by a car that's going 40 miles an hour, you're highly likely to be killed in that type of accident just because of the speed. Roundabouts, they introduce a slower speed, and people had to come in and drive at a lower speed. So if someone was hit, it would be they would be less likely to be killed. The speeds are lower. They're coming in at like 20, 25 miles an hour around the circle when people are crossing. So there's more time for you to kind of get out of the way. And if you get hit, there's less likelihood. It's just that 40-mile and up is when you could be killed if something happens. And the other speed's the same thing. It just depends. But that's one thing that people are looking at here now, because we don't have a lot of roundabouts in Texas right now. They're starting to do them and look at them more, and we'll see more in that case. And so, as far as the shared use paths, those are starting to happen more, especially in the cities. Some of the cities, especially in town, in the city of Houston, they are looking at that. Whenever you put in a project, they're looking at if you can put in a path, separate, or a lane that's shared, but kind of you have some barrier in between. They want to create barriers between motor vehicles and cyclists as much as they can possibly do that. And that's happening at the local level a lot in a lot of the major cities here. So if you come, you can look for that around the state and see those types of things happening.
what
The
are some of the tools
rail,
they have
go
for
ahead.
that for to create that barrier, like a curb or like parked
Yeah,
cars?
sometimes there's a separation with a curb. Other traffic control devices, those permanent cones that you see, they have that, and sometimes they just totally separate. There's a curb, and then there's a grass strip, and then there's a separate lane. So they're doing that in many ways here. Preferred method is if you can have a separate path. That's the best. But if you can't, then they're using traffic control devices to separate cyclists from the traffic as much as they could possibly do it. And to bring attention to cyclists, they use, I don't know if in Ohio starting to do this more, but also coloring those bike lanes a different color, like they're green now. And so they have, the cycles. And so it kind of makes people notice that more, and hopefully they'll stay out of those areas where the cyclists are traveling. And so that's another thing. They are, across the state, we are doing a combination of things. You mentioned the Rails to Trails program, so that happens as much as it can happen. And then they're doing for tourism. There's trails. They're putting together a statewide plan that connects people across the state, and that includes a variety. When they say trails on that, they also mean trails, shared use paths, that sort of thing, a combination of things, and connecting those for people that love to cycle. And so that's some of the things that you'll see in the next few years.
I will say, plugging for Southwest Ohio, which you may know because you lived here, John. We have the largest system of bike path, I guess, in the nation, out throughout Dayton and Cincinnati and out into the country. And I'll go out sometimes on a bike ride, and it's funny how even that green, what is it, maybe 4 foot wide lane, uh, it's just paint on the road, but it makes you feel a little more comfortable. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I mean,
it
dedicated
helps.
pathway would probably be best, but it does make you feel a little bit a little bit safer. So it is something small that can help. And I was saying one time, and Ben, you might have been with me, I don't remember, but I was cycling with some folks, and the gentleman said, he said, this is probably the most dangerous thing you'll do today, because we were sharing the bike road with cars. And I was thinking, man, I'm on this leisurely ride. I'm not trying to put my life in danger. But he was probably right compared to
Yeah.
your traditional, I'm going around driving somewhere to get grocery shopping or something. Here you are
Right.
thinking you're on a leisurely bike ride. And he's like, it's funny. This is probably the most dangerous thing you will do today, which
Mhm.
is probably a true statement. I mean, if I'm not
Yeah.
like fighting fires or
Right.
something, you know what I mean?
I used to, when I was younger, I used to ride a bike in traffic all the time, no lane, riding with traffic.
Mhm.
And I would even ride, people shouldn't have been doing this, but on my bike on the handlebar sometimes. And so that was so dangerous, but, didn't know any better at the time. But yeah, now things are where we need to include safety in everything that we do, as engineers and planners, and just educating the public as well. So,
The downtown Dayton thing is light years different because I would ride down there early 2000s when there was no bike lanes at all, and you've got 4 or 5 lanes going one way, and it just wasn't clear to anybody who was supposed to be there. I mean, you couldn't be on the sidewalk, you couldn't really be in the street, and so there was just kind of this aggression factor that everybody was cyclists too. You would
hmm
just you'd all ride and drive like crazy to get through
yeah.
downtown. And now that they have that dedicated lane, it's kind of like it's very clear where everybody's supposed to be.
Yeah, I think Ohio has a lot of exciting programs coming up as well, and I know they're doing some active transportation plans. The state as well coming up. I know they have some things coming up too, and they're really aggressive, especially in the Cincinnati area for cyclists and pedestrians. They have had a total shift in the way that they operated over 20 years ago. I started working there in I'd say early 90s, I guess, early to mid 90s. And so the focus then was moving traffic. And so when we did projects, it was how many cars we could get through, the intersections efficiently and all that. And now there's been kind of like a 180 on that, where now a lot of the focus is how safe we can make it for cyclists and pedestrians, and they've changed a lot of how they do things. And even to the effect of, they, if traffic is a little bit delayed, it's okay as long as we provide accommodations for pedestrians and cyclists, and we do things to make it safe for them. And so they've had a big shift, and it's a positive shift, and I think a good direction.
Yeah, I think people are used to seeing that stuff. I mean, like you say, Ben, it, it was an afterthought. You know what I mean? Nobody thought anything
Mhm.
about it. Now people are used to seeing it. They know what it means. And I think probably those little things go a long way. The one thing I was surprised about too, looking at, and I just never really thought about it, was for pedestrians and people on bicycles. I was very surprised when they looked at some of these studies about commute usage, and some of the
Mhm.
most remote places had very high numbers of people commuting by bike and foot, like Alaska, Maine. I saw some places
Mhm.
in Texas that said they had a high demand for bike and pedestrian traffic, but it was not Dallas, was not Houston. I don't know if that's a factor of opportunities or maybe income, but I was just like shocked. You think of this as kind of more of an urban problem, and
Right.
I'm not sure that it is, because Alaska and Maine were up there, and those are pretty, all things aside, uh, not overly developed areas. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're right, Daniel. So it's definitely not just an urban problem. People need, to be able to get places, and they don't sometimes have transportation, as far as a car is concerned. And so they need to be able to get places, to and from safely, work, school, or, wherever they're going. And so, yeah, it's not just an urban problem. What happens when communities and, agencies, what happens when they don't have money and they need these things? They need bicycle facilities, and they need sidewalks. And what do they do? Because the funds that I mentioned earlier through the Transportation Alternatives Funding Program is typically, and this is across the country, an 80% to 20% matching program normally. So if you have a project that's $100,000, if you are awarded funding, then the state will give you funds for 80% of that. So you get 80, and the other 20,000 you have to come up with through your community. So I've been posing this question for, I don't know how many years, more than a decade, to people. What happens if we are, if we don't have the money, because not all the agencies have money where they can can do a lot of projects each year. Some people can hardly do any. They're just paving the roads and, patching potholes. And so in Texas, the answer to that has been that they have transportation development credits, and not a lot of states have this. I don't think, and I'm not aware of others. Some of them probably do, but so those credits help communities that are in spot tough conditions, like if the unemployment rate is high, or the poverty line level is low. There's areas that they're aware of, and they track these, and it's available, to know that information, which communities those are. And as far as the Texas Department of Transportation, they provide support. You could be awarded 100%
Hmm.
of the money to be able to do your project. And they did that this round too. I think $35 million of the money that was awarded went to communities that needed those transportation development credits to be able to do projects for people that wouldn't have been able otherwise to do those types of projects.
Seems
To
like
look at.
they're two separate. The answer is the same, but somebody that does not have the funds, so they're either walking or biking to their job, is completely different than people doing the weekend warrior with the fancy gear
Right.
out for
Yeah.
exercise. They're night and day in terms of what the outcome is, but it's kind of nice that the solution I probably the same thing.
Yeah, so that and part of the reason I asked them that question was because typically a lot of times the people that don't have the money for the projects are in a community that doesn't have money. The community just doesn't have the money to be able to do that kind of project. So those are areas where you do also find, and I think if we looked at the heat maps and our planning tools on where some of these crashes are happening, a lot of them likely would be happening in those areas because they don't have the same infrastructure that somebody that has money, to be able to do those kind of projects. And then, on the other flip side of going into um, agencies and said, hey, well, how's everything going? And in this time, in their case, when they have funds, it's like, everything's fine. We have projects and we're able to do the projects that we need, and we apply for funding, and we have people that help that specialize in, helping with grant writing, and they can help us to win these projects. And then on the other hand, people that don't have funds, they don't have people that do that sort of thing. So in our state, TxDOT has a program where they, people, all they have to do is call. They can get on the website and direct it to an engineer or planner, and they invite all to workshops. So everybody can come to those. The workshops are free. If they have any questions about, getting their application in, regardless of if they have the money or not, they kind of walk them through. They can't do it for them, but they can walk them through, like, this is what you need to supply to be eligible, for the funding. You can call and you can ask questions anytime. And so that's how they're trying, to help.
You mentioned in the last, what, 6 or so years, how the attitude towards pedestrian active infrastructure has changed. How have things like e-scooters and e-bikes uh, added to that complexity? Is that a driving force? Are they a hindrance? What's going on there?
It's part of it. That's a great question. It's part of the process, and there's a lot of things that we're considering doing, and there's a lot of still things to be done in those areas. So they need to come up with some kind of rule about where they can park. These things are all over. People are tripping over them, and so that's part of the issues with some of those. And the speed is another one with the e-scooters. This has come up, and there's some rules and policies and things that are being thrown around right now. It's like, how do we handle, for e-scooters? You can drive pretty fast. I think those things go up to about 20, 25 miles an hour. One of the people on the committee that was visually impaired, he said, he's had clients, because he works with people that are disabled, that have been hit at 20 miles an hour by an e-scooter on the sidewalk. And so there's got to be some rules. And so there's some rule making and policies being developed right now. One thought was, when these scooters get into certain areas, urban areas that are dense, they might not be able to travel as fast. How the speeds can be controlled for those, if they need to, create them so they're slower or lower the speeds on those in areas where there's dense, population and people walking. And so there's a lot of things still to come about that. That's a good question, though.
Yeah, I didn't know they had a whole term for those things. They called them micro mobility devices.
Yeah, micro mobility.
I never even
So
heard that term. I just see the little
yeah, so we
bikes and scooters everywhere.
Whenever I travel, I check out the local sort of bike lane
yeah,
situation. And then my brother-in-law lives in Rotterdam, Netherlands, and their bike infrastructure is mature enough that like they have rush hour for bicycles, and then they're all in a dedicated bike
hmm
lanes, and it's complicated. I mean, you don't step into the bike lane ever.
yeah,
It's like walking
that's
into the street.
oh gosh.
So will
It's
we get there,
wild.
John? I mean, will we get to that point where we're like the Netherlands and we have all this
Well,
dedicated infrastructure? Or are we too auto dependent?
I think here, Texas is a big state and it's a big business state. So, they are while they're focused on it and they're really attacking these concerns with the safety and trying to address all the other concerns. They are also focused on moving people and moving goods and making Texas where other businesses are wanting to come and to be able to have access to vehicles as well. So they're also focused on transportation, moving people and moving goods because it's part of their major part of why their economy is kind of booming right now. It's just that's a big deal, a huge deal here. Just overall, they fund transportation. Seems like at the highest level I've ever seen in my life, really. So
Yeah, but I think it's good to hear. I think you're well. I'm sure you're right. Texas is a big transportation state, but it's nice that you and your coworkers are looking at it on a statewide scale to think about need versus recreation, slowing people
right,
down a little bit in the name of safety. Like I think that does it shows a cultural shift that I don't know that we've seen, and we're probably just at the start of it, given that
we are
Texas is not even 10 years into it,
right.
2015 plus, and Ohio's around 2020 plus. So hopefully there's only good things to come.
I think we'll see a lot of good things to come, and just if it's something that they think will drive their economy and drive people to want to pick Texas as a state to live and work in, they're going to do it, and they do it with good speed. So we'll see a lot of action here. One of the things I want to do is reach out to people that really need the help the most and get them help as well. And I'm thinking that we're going to see more of that in ways, and we're going to be inviting people to, to apply for funding and to get the help they need as well. So we'll get them involved.
And all because of Safety Town, right?
Definitely start. That's a good, fantastic start.
John, thank you for making time for us today. It's interesting to hear. We don't. I feel like a lot of the engineering and things, you don't necessarily look at the person bicycle level with a lot of that. At least not some of the larger engineering projects. It's definitely cool that it's part of our planning process moving forward. So we appreciate your time and expertise.
Yeah, thanks a lot. These are exciting times. I'm looking forward to some great projects and lots of things happening. So thank you.
Good stuff.